Last July, we launched an equity-minded action plan to help dismantle structural or systemic factors that contribute to racial and gender inequities, not only here in the school, but elsewhere as well. We recognize that our goal, which is to engineer a better world for all humanity, comes with an important responsibility, namely to acknowledge, educate, and commit to change it by dedicating resources, prioritizing action, and being accountable for all instances that violate these commitments. Today's panel is an example of our dedication to address these ways and the ways that technology may unintentionally or inadvertently, or sometimes intentionally, contribute to the continuation of such practices. Robotics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, network systems have become increasingly common in society. And robotic researchers, as well as all of us in engineering and technology, have the moral imperative to address the ways inequities can be, hopefully unwittingly, extended by autonomous systems. It is almost inevitable that autonomous systems can be endowed with unconscious bias and/or inadvertently replicate current mindsets or practices for racial inequities and other inequities as well. This is something that, if not corrected, could jeopardize the civil rights of everyone. In recognition of this important technology impact on society, we're actually launching at USC Viterbi an effort to educate and help develop what I call trustworthy engineers. These are engineers who are not only distinguished by their superb technical competence, which is offered in many engineering schools, but also by their character, that combine competence with character. The two add up to trust, something sorely needed in our world today. Today's panelists are leaders in these areas. We're very happy to welcome back to USC Dr. Chad Jenkins, Professor of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of Michigan, where he's also the Associate Director of the Robotics Institute. Chad is one of the nation's leading roboticists, speaking out about race, robotics, and civil rights. More importantly, he's our own alum, having earned his PhD studying with our next panelist, his proud advisor, Maya Matarik. Maya's expertise is in human-robot interactions. Her own research focuses on how robots can help society by aiding children with autism spectrum disorder, or by helping stroke survivors or Alzheimer's patients improve their lives. Currently on loan from USC Viterbi, she is the interim vice president of research for USC. Nonetheless, Maya continues her research in the Interaction Lab as a distinguished professor of computer science and as director of the Robotics and Autonomous Systems Center. Last but not least, we're very pleased to welcome Kendrick Davis and the USC Center for Equity and Race, who are co-sponsoring today's event, and Kendrick will moderate the panel. Kendrick is the Chief Research Officer at the USC Center for Equity and Race. He's an associate professor at the Rossi School of Education. He has an extensive history in policy, including working with the mayor of Philadelphia and with Vice President Kamala Harris. His expertise is in the educational outcomes of students of color in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM, and he has undergraduate and master's degrees in robotics. So it is wonderful to have this great panel today. Before I mute myself, I would also like to acknowledge and congratulate Katie Mills and Darren Gray for their continued excellence in leading our K-12 STEM Center, including putting together today's event. Their work is essential and it is necessary. In our era of accelerating change, the importance of STEM disciplines in empowering it and the need to keep creating trustworthy engineers. So please welcome our panel, and I will mute out of this, as I mentioned before. Thank you very much.
Katie, you want me to take it from here? Awesome. Thank you, Dianis, for that very great intro, not just to yourself in the school, but to the week and what we're all doing here thank you for everybody who was in attendance. A special thank you to Darren and Katie, who have been great co-collaborators, especially Katie, who we've been in the trenches and ironing out the details of this particular event. And certainly thank you to Maya and Chad for making yourselves available for this important conversation. So I know that we've covered the sort of formal parts of your introductions. So I'd like to just start with Maya, and I'll sort of set the stage and then ask you to kind of give your sort of perspective on what brought you to this work. So the title of this event, as we all know, is Race, Robotics, and Civil Rights. Three things that I think all of us have probably had separate conversations about, but not in a sort of integrated way that we are today. And all of them are important because of the things that we see and are experiencing every day. Whether it's the sort of racial unrest that has become more clear since the summer murder and now trial of George Floyd and his the police officer who killed him. We see the continued sort of fight for civil rights, not just along racial lines, but for those in the LGBT community, for trans folks. We see this continued sort of beckoning for just everyone to be treated with a humanistic perspective. And I think race and civil rights being together is so sort of expected. But where does robotics fit into this? We're in Southern California, and so it's apropos to think that a lot of people's conceptualization of robotics has been shaped by the Hollywood movies and AI and robots and things like that. But we know that world is much more expansive, and that's what we want to really get into today. So Maya and Chad, if you can spend a couple of minutes each just telling us what sort of brought you to this work, what motivated you, and sort of where do you see the power of robotics in this world we live in today?
Thank you, Kendrick. That's not an easy question, because I think we've all had a long path in getting to where we are today, and we're not today in a place where we would like to be yet. And so for me, the main motivation for doing the kind of robotics that I do, which is basically robotics for special needs communities and other disenfranchised groups, it really comes from the fact that technology has this incredible power. It's a force multiplier, and it brings out kind of our true selves. It reflects humanity at its best and its worst. And so you can have technologies that will make people's lives better significantly. And that's not a dream. That is a fact. There are examples. And then we can have technologies that do terrible things to our lives. And I won't give examples, but we can all think of some. And so my hope for robotics was to be able to develop a branch of that very large field, because robotics is huge, and it spans everything from intelligent things that you can inject into people's brains these days, literally, all the way to robots that are manufacturing cars and going to Mars, and then everything in between. And so I was hoping to find a niche and really to develop a niche within that broad field that would create machines that would empower people. And that really is all about inclusion. So it's really about the fact that the world can be a very, very unfair and discriminating place, but technology can serve to level the playing field at least a little bit more. So I don't want to sound like it's going to solve all problems, and it can, as I said, cause problems, but it can solve some. And so, for example, with special needs populations, like we mentioned, autism, survivors of stroke, and so on, there are things that machines can help us with if we don't have the support that we could use from people. And so that was the idea behind the field. And I think for me, the sort of the most wonderful experience is what my students over the years have done with that. So they've had their own interpretations, they've had their own ideas, they've had their own visions, they've come in with their own lived experiences and have really just done amazing and different things and a variety of things, all of which I'm more than happy to embrace. Sometimes people ask us, why do you do so many different things? And I think that's exactly why, because that's where the promise and the potential is. And so really, I think my best answer is to hand it over to Chad, who is precisely one of those people who has, taken the opportunity that he had as a grad student and everything that he had lived before and since to do amazing things. So I'm just going to hand it over to him now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maya. Thank you not just for the handoff, but also everything you've done for me in my career. And I just wanted to say, there's my story, and we can get into it, but I exist in a longer historical perspective, and when I think about robotics, I mean, and given this is National Robotics Week, maybe a little bit of understanding about where robotics comes from. Robotics is not actually a scientific term. It comes from science fiction. The term robot itself comes from a play called Rossum's Universal Robots, by Carol Chapek, and that's from 1920s. And what that word actually comes from, it comes from the Czech word for slave, effectively slave, robota. And so every time we've thought about robots, even from our imaginations to how we think about robots in the world, we're really thinking about how can we automate tasks, how can we not have a person do it and have a machine do it. And so really this is as we've come along in the historical perspective, I worry greatly that what we're thinking about when it comes to robotics is we're thinking about an exploitable labor force. That sounds a little dark to think of it that way, but that's why the work that we do to take the humanistic perspective and marry it with what we're doing in terms of in engineering, what we do in the lab, the hardcore stuff we do, these are not distinct. These have to work together to make sure that we can develop this technology, develop the labor force that we need for so many things across our society, but do it in a way that's not just going to lead to more exploitation, that sort of harkens back to many historical trends that we've had in our country and throughout the world. This is really this journey that we're on to develop amazing robots, really is really about how do we develop machines that can help us do things without putting more people at risk. Because what we know from civil rights is that you can't have equal opportunity for anybody unless you have equal opportunity for everybody.
Yeah, thank you both for the opening remarks that really, give us a lens into sort of your motivations, backgrounds, and like what brought you to the work, and in many ways what you were trying to achieve. And one of the things that you brought up is this sort of the scientific nature of it is that, yeah, there needs to be integration of all these different parts and systems together. But we also see that in the sort of social and the outside world, that that we also need to be worried about how different systems integrate together. And one of the things that is a topic of considerable interest to all of us is that of education, how different systems have worked together to reinforce certain communities, particularly communities of color, in poor educational outcomes, in attending schools where you may not have sort of high quality materials and things like that. And I'd love for you both to talk about this, but specifically Maya, again, getting away from the Hollywood version of robotics, what are some ways that in your work and the work you've seen in others that robotics has actually been helping to level the playing field where those disparities exist?
So first, as a backdrop, we are very much living in the world of the digital divide, right? So we have kids who have tremendous opportunities to play around with robots and build robots and program them. And that's a tremendous stepping stone in terms of not so much what exactly they learn about robots, because, it's just starting out with something, but it gives them the idea that this is one of the things that they could do with their lives, that this could be for them. And at the same time, we have large populations where school districts are not resourced enough in order for kids to be able to tinker like that. And if they don't tinker, then they don't know that this is a potential option for their future. And so one of the things that we've been doing with robotics, I think across the country, there have been numerous grassroots efforts to take research and bring it to the K-12 level. And ideally to broaden it beyond just, the well-off school districts and take them, for example, at USC, we've done a lot to work with the local neighborhood, and have actually, in many cases, found much more receptive, I will say, teachers and principals than in some of the schools where, they're so well-resourced that there's just another thing. And so that's been very promising, because something about physical robots, something about the ability that you are programming something and you see it in the physical world is very satisfying and empowering for kids and for adults. It's hard, but it is very satisfying. And so kind of seeing the ability that you could do that, and you can do that, whoever you are, can really make a difference in thinking that, hey, you know, I could do that. Oh, that's called engineering. So that means I could be an engineer. Whereas otherwise, if you say, oh, well, you could be an engineer, well, that doesn't really mean anything. And I saw that for decades as a woman. So, you know, when we talk about inclusion, there's also a digital divide across gender, which is still out there very much, very alive in tech, very alive. And that's obviously intersectional. And so, you know, what the robotics sort of one success, I would say, of our field has been to take simple robots out to kids and have kids realize, ideally, across all kinds of socioeconomic divides, that this is something that may be for them. Now, what's hard is then what? Will they have the ability to do more? And I really honestly think that's more important than what they see in movies, because we can all see amazing things in movies that we also know are not really for us, right? Like, you know, that they're not very realistic. So I think the hands-on, the tangibility, the fact that you can play with something makes it real. And now the challenge is, how can we go beyond the classes into the lives of kids so they can keep tinkering, so they have more opportunities to do more of that and get real training so that they don't have disadvantages when they're competing for the next step of education. And in fact, so that they know that they can and should try for that next step. So that, I think, is a very big power of robotics. If you look at the National Robotics Initiative in the United States, one of the things that it counts as its major success is not the research leaps, like, oh, we are starting soft robotics that we didn't have before. That's great. Or, you know, whatever else. Oh, we've got self-driving cars, we've got flying, you know, things. No, but it's really getting out to K-12 kids and getting kids more excited. That's a major, I won't call it a success because it's not a fully equitable success, but it is a first step. So that's something I'm excited about, even though it needs a lot of work.
Absolutely. Chad, jump in, please.
So yeah, I think in this regard, it's a topic very near and dear to my heart as somebody who is a super nerdy Black kid that, you know, that was completely isolated, you know, I was just, you know, I didn't fit in any world growing up. And, you know, and when I got my Atari 2600, and I was like, what is this thing? How does it work? It was just amazing. The tangibility that Maya's talking about, like to see something, to see the TV that was used to this thing that I would watch What's Happening or Sanford and Son on. And I couldn't interact with those images, but now I could. How do I make that happen? That fascination. And that's just something that, you know, that we need to think about robotics that way. How do we inspire kids to, you know, to think they can be a part of it? Because when I was growing up, I remember, you know, when I was, you know, growing up, you know, my family's from Louisiana and Texas. You know, I'm the only scientist in my family, really. You know, being so different, I didn't understand that the career path that I eventually was able to pursue I didn't know that was available to me. I didn't know I could do this. And just telling kids, like, this is something you could be. I'm not a super genius. I'm just somebody that loves what I do, and I'm willing to you know, to really explore and make that happen. I don't think of what I do as work. I think of it as just like, you know, it's just fun, right? And how do we inspire kids to do that? And that really is, I think, a major challenge that we face in robotics. And I also worry that the gap that Maya's talking about, that, you know, that certain kids from certain school districts, they get to see this career path. They get, you know, they have people that, you know, they have teachers that, you know, that can provide resources to them. They can see, you know, they can see many different ways that their life could turn out and be able to explore those opportunities. We don't necessarily have that for across all zip codes in our country. And then when we see them, when kids who even if they are able to excel at the K through 12 level, the thing that really is disturbing me right now is that when we get to the undergraduate level, when they get to the collegiate level, we are not performing very well in higher education to be able to help students get through and get those jobs at a Google or a Facebook or a Fetch Robotics or one of these major companies where they could make a massive amount of money. I look at it and say, even if you were a successful professional basketball player, maybe not LeBron level, but like a successful basketball player, I don't know if you're going to make as much over your career as just an engineer at Google. Right. And, and the fact that the numbers look so bad in terms of the representation, in terms of what we're doing, it makes me think about this was what the civil rights statutes of the 1950s and 60s were attempting to address. And I think we need to come back to those.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to pick up on two things that came up throughout both of your responses and kind of let that navigate us into some of the darker sides of this, and then kind of bring us up into where the light is. Where should we go? We're sort of the promised land in this field. But two things you mentioned was inspiration. Is something that inspiration stuck out because back when I worked for the mayor of Philadelphia, we supported a first Lego League program, or First Robotics, which I'm sure you all have heard of. And inspiration is in the name, and Chad, that disconnect you talk about, and Maya, that sort of gender equity issue always came up. But one of the ways that First Lego League in particular, you form a robotics team that's 10 people or less, and everybody sort of has their role. They're the programmers, they're the people preparing the presentation, so on and so forth. Everybody has their role, and it worked well because those who didn't have the or who were not as interested in the technical expertise could find something else to do that was still contributing to the overall team. And so this idea that we need to expand our thinking of what is STEM, what is robotics, what is possibilities, and I want to sort of do that in our next response is, what are some things that, whether it's in your work or others, that people would be surprised to know that robotics actually contributes to, or does, or helps out with? What are things that, it doesn't have to be one thing, it could just be a class of things that Maya mentioned earlier, this sort of nano robots that can go through your bloodstream and brain. But what are some things that are outside the mainstream that people would be surprised to know about the power of robotics and technology?
Oh, let me take a few from our field, which I wish were more mainstream, but it's only 15 years old, so I guess I can't really complain. But we have robots that, by we, I mean people have created robots that help children on the autism spectrum to make friends, to smile for the first time, to learn better. We as a field have created robots that have allowed people to walk who couldn't physically move. Chad, in his own work, has explored creating robots that will restore dignity for people who have lost physical function, such as quadriplegics. I mean, there's just so many other examples that are so compelling. The other thing that I would want to throw out that I put in every one of my talks these days, and it's very easy to give talks during the pandemic because no one has to pay for your travel. So, we're just giving talks all the time. That's great. I think I've been in 1 week, I was in 3 different countries. It was so much fun from my desk right here.
Right.
But one thing that I say actually to everybody who's listening is that the world has massive problems that it's facing, and let's not try to like gloss over that. We have massive problems of inequity, problems of climate change, food scarcity. I mean, you name it. But all of these technologies that we're creating have a role to play, both positively and negatively. And we could all, or many more of us, be working on technologies that will make a positive difference. And I am so just like, my heart is warmed by the undergraduates that I work with, for example, at USC, who are working on that. Do you know we have a club, and this is AI, not robotics, but it doesn't matter, it's the same thing. We have a club that has over 150 undergraduate members who take a pledge that if they go into AI, they will only do it for bettering the world. I think that's great to see among undergraduates. I don't know how many will stick with that, but I mean, they're making a pledge. They're not just saying, oh, I'm going to make an app for this nonprofit. They're saying, I will do this as a life goal. So the technologies we're creating are already doing some amazing things, but they don't get celebrated enough. And they could be doing much more amazing things if we put them in the hands of so many more people who are driven to make a difference rather than, frankly, just make a profit. Chad, say it better.
Absolutely. And Chad,
Yeah.
I want you to let us know how close we are to an Iron Man suit.
Well, I will say I'm a computer scientist, not a mechanical engineer. So you'll have to ask somebody else. But I know that was super wonky. I can't let the nerd in me go away. It's always there. But I think the thing is, just to be serious, we're not that far away from an Iron Man suit, right? I mean, it might not be Iron Man, it might be sort of like Aluminum Man to start off with, but it's coming, and there's great people that work on exoskeletons and things like that. But I think the thing is, the great thing about being in our field is that I know that there's a number of different things that we could do right now, and robotics is changing your world the same way that computing changed it over the last 50 years. That's what robotics is going to do over the next 50 years. But I don't, you can talk about autonomous driving and drones and robot surgery and robots in the warehouse. But the great thing about what we do is that we're thinking about stuff that nobody's thought about before. The people that are in our classrooms, the people that are on this call, the people that are going to be and that are sitting in elementary school right now, they are the ones who are going to change the future. And our job is really to create the foundation to make that happen. Research, when I was a kid, what you saw on your phone is or what you saw in Star Trek of having like a video conference, that was all science fiction. Now it is here today. And that is because somebody was able to make that happen. Somebody sitting in a computer science, sitting in an engineering classroom or computer science classroom made that happen. But I'll tell you, the thing that we should really be thinking about that could make a difference, and Maya sort of talked about this, is how do we help our aging and disabled population? Because that really is the big thing that we have to deal with. If you've seen anything from the pandemic, the thing that's been an issue is how do we help people in the medical field, people providing healthcare, people taking care of our seniors, people that need care. It's still a big issue, and there was a big rush to have robots, desanitize things and take care of various hazardous areas. We should have had that ahead of time. The same way that we've had Zoom ahead of time for the pandemic, we should have had that. That is our next big challenge, because it can address some massive costs that are not going to necessarily affect my generation, but it's going to affect my kids' generation and the generation that comes after that. And it also can improve the quality of life for people. So I need the quality of life part. It just need to help me when I become a senior. And so if we can have robots be able to provide care for people and improve their quality of life, that's one of the biggest challenges that we face in our near future.
No, absolutely. And thank you all for sort of digging in deeper. And I'm going to ask us to continue to go deeper and just sort of expand our understanding of the conversation. And one of the things that both of you talked about is, increasing our care and attention to vulnerable communities, whether that's in educational settings, whether it's in geriatrics, whether it is in autism, whatever field it is, increasing our attention to what we would consider vulnerable communities. And one of the things that Maya sort of glossed over, but I want to sort of come back to, is you mentioned artificial intelligence and how robotics, artificial intelligence are so closely related. And what I want to help us do is have an understanding of, it's not just robotics, right? It's not just the things that look like humans or drones, or it's the systems around that, right? That have also been developed as a part of developing robotic technologies like machine learning, like artificial intelligence, but that have turned into their own spin-off products, right? So we see artificial intelligence being used in recidivism software. We see it being used in policing software. We see these sort of systems being used in ways that target vulnerable populations. So I want to sort of turn our attention, and Chad, I want to start with you, turn our attention to what are some of the racialized impacts we've been seeing with robotics technology, and how we know this field is going to progress exponentially. And so with that being said, we're not going to have a lot of chance to pivot while it's happening. So how do we what are some things we need to be careful about and need to be paying attention to protect vulnerable populations as these technologies continue to become more ubiquitous?
Right. I think one of the biggest issues is that technology is real. We will develop it, but it's about how it's being used. And right now, a lot of the technology being used, instead of to help level the playing field and help provide more access to those that need it, it's being used to make the things that we're doing that have created disparate impacts, created more discrimination, to just exacerbate that and do it more cheaply and more efficiently, and lower cost. These are things that, so that is, if you're talking about college admissions, or being able to have access to financing to buy a house or to buy a car. If you're talking about, hiring databases, people are like, well, why should we have a person do that? We can just go train up an AI to just run, to just generate answers quickly. And they're just trying to do it on the cheap. You can't do these things on the cheap. Without giving it a lot of thought and care and concern, it is the Wild West right now. And it's creating more discrimination. The problem is that what we're really talking about when we talk about robotics or artificial intelligence, we're really talking about automation. How do you automate a task? The same way that your computer is doing a lot of automation for you. It's bringing up tweets, it's suggesting things, it's making recommendations, or it's doing little things for you in the background. It's automating, all those dull tasks that you don't want to do. Robotics is just going to do the same thing, but in the physical world. It all fits together. And so when you're making these automated systems, if you have a very non-diverse group that's making it, that's creating this technology, and then you have a non-diverse group that is deciding how it's going to be deployed, and then deploying it against places where they don't want to necessarily be, against a very diverse or disadvantaged population, all that's going to lead to is more and more inequity. The solution for this is partially what people like Timnit Gebru. If you haven't seen Coded Bias, it's a great movie. They're saying we need to regulate those technologies. We need to have policymakers understand what's going to be the impact, to look after the people, because we can't necessarily expect companies to do that. But there's another part of it too, which is we have to make sure that we have diversity through our education system, through higher education, all the way up through the research labs, all the way to the development teams, to the executive rooms, because if you don't have that diversity all the way through, that history has just told us that will lead to bad effects in terms of hiring, admissions, autonomous driving systems that can't see Black people, warehouse robots that take jobs and without regard to necessarily keeping people employed and allowing them to earn a living. It's really, just think about wherever your computer is, that you have a computer, smartphone, whatever. Imagine that for physical tasks, and that's what robotics is going to do over the next few decades.
Thank you, and Maya, please feel free to jump in on that response. But I also want to add, particularly because of the work you've done, as these sort of robotics assisted learning become more widespread, how do we make sure that the vulnerable populations that need it are actually the ones who have access to these technologies?
These are the key questions. And in fact, I mean, as Chad said, it's critical that everything we developed is developed by a very diverse group of developers, but also that group includes the beneficiary populations. I think what's happening right now, in particular in industry, but also in research, is that you have groups doing the development who happen to be there, and they're representative, well, of themselves and not of the people who are actually meant to be the community that's using the devices. And then most people do is, they'll do a survey, or they'll go out and talk to a few people. But really, if you have developers on the team, it makes all the difference. Let me make an example out of the autism community, because there, for example, what you see individuals on the autism spectrum being part of software development tools for users on the spectrum. And now suddenly you see products being developed and ideas being generated that are actually properly informed. And we need this across the board. So across all of the different populations. And it's incredibly rare. And I don't even know why, because when it comes to product development, it just seems like a no-brainer that you would include the people who actually know about, the market you're trying to address. Now, unfortunately, it's also the reality that many of those markets are not seen as markets. they're orphans because, they may not generate enough profit. And so the answer is always in inclusion. The answer is in your team needs to be broad and broadly inclusive, and then you will come up with much more interesting ideas and much better solutions. I know that seems really obvious, but it's so frequently overlooked. And you ask a point about learning, and that's really critical, because when we're creating, let's say, AI or robotics for learning and for teaching young minds, we're basically, any bias we build in is a bias that will be transferred. And that's why it's so critical to have all the software developed in a broad way. And also, I agree with Chad. I do think that there should be oversight. And if that oversight means some kind of proper regulation, then that should be done. Because right now what's happening is there's a lot of talk about ethics in technology. But for all the talk and for all the academic, this conference here and this conference there, we have a lot of not fundamentally ethical things out there. And so, let's talk more action. That's always my my philosophy is we should try things in terms of really effective ways of I don't know what the word is. Nobody likes the word regulation. Nobody likes the word monitoring. But if you don't do it, what you are doing is you're experimenting with the world. And these experiments are frankly going wrong.
Yeah.
I will just say real quickly, regulation has gotten a bad rap, but really it's just about how should people use this technology. It's not, trying to be overbearing. It's just saying these are the rules of the road that we all agree on, right? And just exploring that. One thing that I also want to say, and just to give a more an example that comes close to me as an educator, is I worry that we get students that come to our undergraduate program. They're the valedictorians of their school, but they don't have the same resources. They get to a place like University of Michigan that has it's not cheap. The University of Michigan isn't cheap. And because there's such a competition right now, there's such a feeling of everybody's trying to get that job at Google or Facebook or Apple or Microsoft or definitely Amazon, that people are getting weeded out, and they're getting weeded out after taking on huge amounts of debt. We have to really think about what we're doing in higher education so that we can enable a workforce that, as Maya said, does represent the greater population, that does bring in people who, when like somebody like one of my cousins from Southeast Texas, who, has no clue what I do, but they're just like, he's that smart, nerdy guy, right? I need to be able to understand how they're thinking about the problem. If I take it to my uncle's church, right, and and they see and just get their opinion about what this robot is and what it should do and how it might affect their lives, we need that kind of input. And I can't agree with Maya more in that regard.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you both for helping us sort of better understand both of those things. Put a message in the chat for attendees. If you have questions for the panelists, please feel free to drop them in the chat so that we can switch over into the Q&A that is audience driven. But one of the things, as you all sort of consider the questions, drop in the chat. One of the things I want to touch on before we get into, well, where do we go from here? What recommendations do we have for institutions of higher education, policymakers, is we often talk about, and I think sometimes we go for the heavy titles like, well, racism, robotics, and why should we have impacted voices and communities at the table in the design process? Can you all just give, for those who may be unfamiliar with technology or robotics, how any of this works, just a really concrete example of what could be a negative impact of not having an impacted voice at the table when designing some of these technologies?
Black unemployment. That is the one of the biggest things, right? Right now, if you can't earn a job and you can't earn a living, then that's why a lot of people are struggling right now. And so if you automate the entire labor force and it's just robots going off and doing things for the warehouses, and it is doing all the refinery for oil and gas, and doing all installations and monitoring and repairing our infrastructure, all the things that used to have people do, you have robots do that. That replacement is dangerous unless you can reinstate people to do other things that we're not thinking about, to be able to rethink education. Instead of having one adult for every 20 children? Could you reverse it and have 3 adults for every child and provide individualized education? Can we use humans and robots together to help repair our crumbling infrastructure, to be able to explore new areas of space, either off the planet or like deep sea exploration? I think agriculture, we talked about food insecurity. How do we have people do that so we can make enough food and deliver it to people so that nobody goes hungry? And as I said before, healthcare is something that just takes a massive amount of cost and resources, and we could improve, we could make that more efficient, less soul crushing, and provide a better quality of life. I think those are things we could do, with robots helping people do things better.
Yeah, I just want to add that there's a term for that came out of old robotics, which is augmentation. So I now also, in all my talks these days, I start out by saying that most of robotics is focused on automation. The whole idea of automation is that you replace human work, right? Because people are expensive and they get sick and they get old. And, wouldn't it be nicer if we could just have robots, right? Except that what does that mean for so many people? So there's another idea of robotics, not automation, by augmentation. The idea being that we want to do these things that Chad mentioned, right? We can build exoskeletons that allow people to do work safely, much more powerfully, and definitely more smartly than machines can, right? There are a lot of things machines cannot do because they don't have our brains. When it comes to healthcare, as Chad mentioned, it's such a giant space of challenges, and we have to be very careful. We might create machines that do all the fun stuff, like we can have fun robots for the elderly, while the low-paid humans are changing the beds and the diapers, because that's still too hard for machines. So we need to think very carefully about that balance between automation and augmentation. And we need to spend a lot more time augmenting what people can do rather than replacing them. That's the balance we need.
Word up, Maya. I agree with everything you said.
Thanks.
I was going to say, you can, it sounds like you are writing tech policy for
I wish, but I wish that's the whole the point. Who is writing the policy? I think that what happens in the world is very bottom up in the sense, and it's very competitive from the industry perspective. One thing that I've been frustrated with, I'm just going to be honest, because I really want young people to hear this. I am severely disappointed when I see these incredibly smart students go off and spend all that brain power to make a robot that flips burgers. Who cares? Why are you flipping burgers? People flip burgers perfectly fine. And I don't care if you can flip burgers faster. Go do something meaningful, like go work on something that actually helps more people get a job or more people get food, right? Flipping burgers, what? And that's very fundable by the venture capitalists. I mean, this is the disappointment. That's where the money is going. Yeah. Because also let's look at who is fueling the funding. What do people who are investing the money look like? Wow, they all look kind of the same along a lot of metrics. And that's really scary, because when you have all the investors look one way, then all the investors are also acting one way. Again, a lack of diversity, a lack of inclusion, and therefore, I'm sorry to say, a lack of vision.
And Maya, you hit the head on the nail on the head, or the head on the nail. Where you got it right. You were right on. In that really it comes down to what we're willing to invest in. Right. And so, if you have venture capitalists that look the same way, they're going to invest in the same things. And they're usually thinking about how can we cut costs on the things we already know how to do, instead of taking bold risks for things that we should be thinking about in the future. Because really, at the end, that's the government's job. All these things that we're enjoying right now, they didn't get invented by Google and eBay and all of these things. Those were investments that were made back around, just after World War I and World War II, that have now started to pay off. And that's, if you, and get a little wonky here, if you go back to the Vannevar Bush, and like, as somebody who enabled this science and engineering ecosystem with a lot of government investment, that really is what's setting the stage for the future. Yeah. And the problem is that when we're thinking about universities, who are really the engines for all of this innovation, we run on government funding, but we're seeing disparate impacts that aren't in line with civil rights statutes. If we had federal funding that lived up to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title IX. I think a lot of those things that allowed for that enshrined balance across many different demographics. That's what's going to provide the foundation for good things to come in the future. Because if you keep doing the same old stuff over and over and over again, you're going to get the same result. And so both, and that's not just for diversity, that's for just your overall technological product, right? You get better products when you get more diversity.
Right, absolutely. Thank you both. You all actually helped to sharply turn the corner to where I was going, and that is, well, where do we go from here, and what do we do, and who's responsible, right? One of the actually friends of Viterbi Engineering and friends of Giannis, Vijay Kumar, the Dean of Penn Engineering, he was an advisor to me when I was in my robotics program, and he took a stint at the White House Office of Science Technology Policy. Yep. And one of the conversations we need to have is about policy, right? Like, who's responsible for what? I love the Vannevar Bush reference because he and his team single-handedly made the case for the government making significant investments in basic scientific research. So it's like, so to both of you, what do institutions of higher education do? What do policymakers need to hear and do?
So I'm going to say it first because Chad will then have a better answer about this. It's true. I'm not just saying that, it's true. So my knee-jerk reaction, which I still stick with, is that everyone should be responsible. I think what's happening right now is, so there's a spotlight, in particular on race. But what we're seeing is that now we're going to get a diversity officer, and then that person will be in charge, and they're going to solve the problem for us. I'm sorry, like in the words of the youth, that's not a thing. Everybody has to be responsible. Otherwise, nothing happens. Like the idea that we're going to let professors choose their graduate students freely without caring about diversity, but then some diversity officer over there on the side is going to do what? What are they going to do? Give talks? And somehow it's going to magically work out? So I really firmly believe that it's everyone's responsibility and everyone has to care, but that is not to dilute the fact that there have to be a set of measurable oversight bodies. And I think Chad is going to talk about that. But I think it is true that if you're going to take federal money, then you should have to be held to certain standards. Like, you should not be able to get away with only hiring graduate students who look a particular way. But I would like to see that also for venture. Because, this idea that only certain kinds of people have the best money-making ideas, well, those are the only ones who've been given a chance. And that's
Absolutely.
a problem. Chad.
Yeah.
I think you hit the nail on the head. It really is, you have to spend money to make money, right? And if you're spending money, if you're investing, I shouldn't get political on this, but I love the fact that the current presidential administration is saying we need to invest in America. We need to invest in our roads. We need to invest in our infrastructure, our, extending, broadband to rural communities, places that don't have access, updating our power grid, because that is the engine that and investing in research and development, which then helps us educate more people and do it more diversely. Because the thing is that infrastructure then becomes the engine that allows us to do more. You can't have Arthur Rock, who really invested in Intel and all of those companies that made it, that we know and love, that came out of Silicon Valley. He helped make Silicon Valley. You can't have that venture effort without the Vannevar Bush. And that allowed for the infrastructure to grow. But also, if you're going to do that, we've seen the dangers of that as well. If you're looking at Facebook or Google or the things that they're doing wrong now, that is rooted way back into the choices that were made when in the 50s and 60s, when the transistor was being developed. This is something that has been enshrined in our institutions. Now is the time, with the money that you are investing, to decide what your values are. You invest in your values. And if you want to invest in, the people that you invest in are the ones that are going to help shape the future. And one thing that I would say, and I'm going to take issue with the National Science Foundation here, they say that they invest in projects and not people. But I don't think that's true. I think if you look at the record, they invest in people and not projects. The people that have pedigree, that have all of the aura of the institution behind them. Those are the people that get investment. Those are the people that they're allowed to shape the future. But we have to look beyond the usual suspects, and that takes some time, some dedication, but it also takes money to let 1,000 flowers bloom, and then give everybody a chance and see what sprouts up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that is worth mentioning. People think of science and engineering, for that matter, as being somehow pure, right? Like we have the scientific method and we're purely objective. But in fact, every system is created by people and run by people. And that means it's susceptible to human bias, which is plentiful. But there too, the best way to change that is to be more inclusive, because people are sometimes shocked by what people from places they didn't think about can achieve. But then they're sobered up because ultimately they want achievement. So it's just about giving that opportunity. And so, I mean, I'm very optimistic, actually. I definitely wouldn't want us to end on a note that's all about issues. Yes, we have plenty of issues, but I have great faith in this new generation, because people are more outspoken. They're more aware. When I think back about how much I understood about the world when I was a grad student compared to my grad students or even undergraduates, oh my goodness. So I think it cuts both ways, right? They are more aware, more informed, and therefore more worried. They have more anxiety about the world because, there's good reason. On the other hand, think about all that we can achieve when people are that aware that early. If they then directed their efforts towards causes that matter, we can achieve so much more than, when some of us had to take decades to learn things. Like after I had kids, I was like, whoa, let's wake up to some of these things, right? So I'm hopeful.
I know. I just to also say, I think we're going to figure out ways to teach math a lot better, a lot easier, without taking so much pain, because really that is the engine that drives a lot of what we do. And I think the innovation is starting to come towards education. I think it's going to open up so much more for everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you both. And we will leave it there.